So Jim, why does a business owner that is in the process of building and forming an LLC need a customized LLC operating agreement, and why can't they just buy one off the internet that's form filled and off of any of these incorporate you now without any customization?
Well, I think that's a really timely question, Mark, because with all of this publicity now about offshores and out-of-state entities, or even just becoming an entity and the benefits of it, a lot of people are now looking around and forming these, and I think they're shopping the forms that appear on the web and other places. And here's the real difficulty. Most of these are very general. Operating agreements are virtually the guts. They're the heart and the soul of an LLC, and articles of incorporation are that of a corporation. They're pretty much the same, it's just the different entities. And in those, it spells out not only what you can do from a parliamentary process, how the parties inside of it interact, but how much capital is at risk and under what circumstances and what rights everybody has. But it also expresses what interests everybody has. And by the way, there's a common thought that if you put in $2 and I put in $2, we each should have a 50-50 interest. And many of these entities are not cut up that way, and they don't have to be. You could put in $1 and end up with a 50% interest. I could put in $1,000 and end up with the other 50% interest. All that determines is our basis in our holdings, how much we have in it for profit and loss purposes if we ever sell that interest or if we get a distribution. But we don't have to allocate it based strictly on the pro rata share of what it is we put in. Now, a lot of people don't know that. And the reason I even bring that up as a point is because that can actually be the real reason why the parties unite in an entity. One's after tax deductions and one is after gain. One's going to be the passive operator and one's going to be the active. And unless that's spelled out someplace, you're not going to get it. And in the ones that you pull down from the internet and other form books, they don't spell that out. They leave large blank lines about who's going to contribute what. And in those blank lines is a lot of mischief. I've got to tell you, lawyers have made a pile of money taking home-built operating agreements that now have gone awry and they're on the rocks and everybody's suing each other. They've made a pile of money out of defending people from those home-built jobbies. No, the custom one is pretty serious. Now, here's some things that have to be decided in an operating agreement. Not just who's going to be the members and who's going to be the managing member, not just stuff like that and the things I mentioned before. But let me just give you a list because I wrote some down right before you and I visited today. For instance, many of these are the issuance of securities. Have you got language in it that's going to be appropriate for the issuances of securities? Yeah, securities. An interest in an entity, even an interest in a membership of an LLC, is a form of security. So have you got the right language for that? Not one that I've seen out there any place on the net even contemplates such a thing. And yet, as you know, and I think all of us in business know, to violate securities laws is worse than a no-no. That's the one where they just take you out and cut your head off and be done with it. It is probably one of the worst out there because having the SEC, either the state or the federal one after you, is pretty much the end of the story. They have more money than you have, and they pursue these things longer. So you don't want to say the wrong thing and end up with an investor who has securities rights against you. In many cases, these LLCs are set up by one guy is the guy that's, shall we call it for lack of a better word, the brains of the outfit, the talent, and the other guy is the money of the entity. And, you know, unless you treat the money guy right with certain disclosures and certain statements that are not otherwise printed in these pre-printed operating agreements, he's going to have the absolute right to get up to triple his amount back from you anytime he's frustrated in the investment because you didn't say the right thing. Operating agreement is the place for that. A few other things. Did you know we have to get a tax ID? Nobody says anything about that. For purposes of the federal government to know who in the heck this new entity is. You have to make a tax election as to how you're going to be taxed. You're going to be taxed as an entity, a sub-S corporation, or you're going to be taxed as a general partnership. You have to determine if there's any licensure needed in the state you're going to. For instance, if you're going out of state and you're doing an activity that you believe is probably lawful in the state of your origin, is it a licensed activity outside the state? For instance, you may set up an LLC that's talking about going into cosmetology. Well, there's some states that need no cosmetics license. All you need is a proprietarial agreement, a license to do business with a city, state, or county, and others require a license. So somebody's going to have to check before you even do that agreement is the state that we're going into, if it's other than the one we're in, do we need a license now suddenly for something that we thought otherwise was an unlicensed occupation? You need to have the tax effect set down of the terms of the agreement. For instance, who's going to contribute what capital and how much? Let me give you an example. If I have a promissory note that is $10,000 face value and it's due in 3 years, and I trade it to the LLC for my membership interest or to the corporation for my stock, and I traded in for a $10,000 value, have I triggered gain? In most cases, forming a company under IRC Section 351 is not a gain-producing activity. But if you have a promissory note, even though it's installment payments, if you trade it for value, it's deemed that all of it was paid at once. So the moment you traded that note for that stock, it's deemed as though you just got paid $10,000 on your note. So now you've got yourself a tax problem for all of your gains that would be otherwise realizable into that note. Now, how would anybody know that with an online form? But those are the things that have to be thought out. Another one is, would you, for instance, lease or sell an asset to the entity, or would you contribute it for capital? If somebody has some equipment that's going to be used by the business, let's say it's going to be a construction business, and somebody has a rolling stock and they have saws and whatnot, should they contribute that to the business in return for their interest? Should they sell it to the business and just take a note back and not even be part of the capital or be a minor part of the capital? Or should they lease it and take income on the lease, but they still retain the equipment, especially on a narrowly held business that's lightly capitalized? Those kind of decisions have to be made, and they have to be incorporated in the operating agreement. So as you can see, there's a lot more to an operating agreement than simply pulling something down and filling out 3 or 4 paragraphs, because that may be enough to make you an LLC, but it isn't enough to do what an LLC is supposed to do, which is to create the whole game plan, the short-term entry point, the how are we going to run while we're running point, and the exit point, such things as, well, what happens when we finally decide to dissolve? Well, what if we're dissolving because one party's in breach? What if they're dead? What if they become incapable of making decisions? What if they become under a guardianship or conservatorship? Are we going to let the new guardian or conservator in, or do we have to dissolve? These are the kind of things that have to be answered, and almost none of them answer those questions. And therein lies the real defect with a non-customized operating agreement. It's enough maybe to make you official as an LLC or a corporation, in the case of articles of incorporation, in the eyes of the law, but it's not enough to set yourself up in a viable, workable way to obtain the mission that your company is being formed to accomplish. So there's my point on those, and as you can see, I froth at the mouth because there are so many of them out there, and they're just uniformly terrible. And I mean with some really big companies that are well known. And the reason, you know, I could say that maybe they shouldn't be in the business at all, and some of these forms distributors have been in trouble with local bar associations who have challenged them and say, wait a minute, drafting a great big long form for a complex business transaction, isn't that the practice of law, and are you really licensed here for that? And just because I pull it down from the internet and you call it a form, isn't there some kind of practice, in a sense, implied in that form that some lawyer has vetted it and said this is what you need, and who vetted it, and are they properly licensed? Those challenges have actually been, a lot of bars thought they were going to be successful, have actually been pretty much uniformly not successful across the country. They have in a couple of states, are still brewing, but it means then that you are getting a form. You don't know, it doesn't even have to be a lawyer that drafted it, who knows who drafted it, and you're just relying on that form as being complete, and in most cases, they're totally not.
Yeah, so guys, think customization, and think customization in terms of how it affects your business today and going forward into the future. And maybe because you save a few $100s or $50 even in some of these cases, it could be detrimental and deadly to your business. So thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Mark, for asking.